Hello and welcome to another edition of OAuth Happy Hour. I'm Aaron Parecki, and we've got Micah Silverman here as well from Okta.
Hey everybody.
Good to see you all here. We are going to be keeping an eye on the chat. Happy to answer any questions as usual, but we do have a couple of things in mind that we wanted to talk about as well. So hopefully we have another good time hanging out today and chatting about all things OAuth. So yeah, if you are joining us live, thanks. And go ahead and say hi in the chat so we know you're there. But in the meantime, if you haven't already heard, there was a pretty big hack of Twitter yesterday, and a lot of high-profile accounts were tweeting some garbage, and that was a little bit too much of a coincidence to have happened, all at the same time. And traditional hacks were unlikely to cause that kind of response as well. So it's definitely interesting to see how this is unfolding. And this is actually still happening right now. This is not yet resolved, and only some information is actually public right now. But we're going to talk about what we do know about the hack, and also what we know about what the hack is not. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we're happy to answer them. So I guess the first thing to start with is just a quick description of the hack, and what happened is several dozen accounts were essentially hacked yesterday and tweeted the exact same tweet, which was basically asking for, it's the classic scam of like, send me a Bitcoin and I'll send you 2 Bitcoins back, right? And that is, obviously that's like a huge red flag in general, because like, why would anybody do that? Also, anything that people ask you to do before they return the favor, that should be a red flag. That's like classic, just straight up classic scam artist technique, right? So, but the problem that this time was that it was, they ended up tweeting this from many verified accounts of very high profile people. And the question is, how did they get into those accounts? Right. That's what everyone wants to know. So where did they, crack everyone's password and crack 2-factor auth? Did they go through use some sort of backdoor, system within Twitter itself? Was there a problem with the OAuth permissions? Did they, hack into some other app that everybody uses and steal API keys out of that? Because all these are like possibilities of how this kind of attack could have happened. But we don't have a ton of information to go on except what Twitter has said publicly, and because this is still unfolding, we have some information from Twitter. But it was quite an adventure yesterday seeing this happen. I don't know, Micah, did you notice it when it was live, like when this actually went down? What were you doing?
That's such a good question. What was the time that it actually happened yesterday?
It was
Remember?
like I think around 2 something Pacific time. Does that sound right?
So I was in the middle of a class, so I caught up after the class was over, but pretty soon after. And
Yeah.
it was pretty clear pretty quickly that it was coordinated. My first thought, which is, I don't know, maybe indicative of my own personality, it was kind of like, what a waste of a hack.
Yeah, exactly. They, the scale to pull that off, like what it takes to pull that off, is huge. And once you burn that, it's done. Like you're not gonna be able to do it again once
Not
you
that
burn
same
that
way for
hack.
sure.
Yeah, and the end of the hack was promoting this Bitcoin scam of I will be doubling every Bitcoin you send me, which is like they made out with what I think the total was like some $100,000 or $200,000 worth, essentially.
Yeah, I'd seen that. I was
Um,
wondering how people were coming up with that number, but assuming it's correct,
well,
while
Bitcoin
on
is
the
all
one
public
hand it's
records.
right, yeah, fair enough. On the one
Yeah.
hand, while it's while it's not nothing on the scale that they were going for, it doesn't match the scale that it seems they were going for to, to hack those verified accounts and the people in particular that they were successful with.
Yeah,
100K
exactly.
is, not at that
They
same level.
no, that hack should be worth a lot more than that. Is one way to say that. Um, I agree. I think it in that sense it actually failed because they didn't get as much as I'm sure they were hoping for out of it. But this is also the classic Bitcoin problem is that all the transactions are public record by the nature of Bitcoin. So it's not like you can hide it. So you post a Bitcoin address, send me Bitcoin here, and then anybody can go look at the address and see what's been sent to it. They immediately start funneling it out. So they funnel it out of that particular address and into other accounts where it becomes harder to trace because it's all spread around. But yeah, you can just go look up the exact transactions that were sent to it. Um, but anyway, yeah, I was actually in the middle of a conversation with somebody on Twitter, like just chatting back and forth. And I actually don't use the Twitter website at all. So what I do is I'm actually posting tweets on my website, and my website is a Twitter client. So I post on my website. My website goes and posts out to Twitter using the API, and it actually works surprisingly well. Like it's great, and then it means that I get a record of everything I say on my website, so that if my Twitter account disappears, I still have all my tweets. But so what? So I was in the middle of this conversation, and all of a sudden I noticed that my tweet hadn't gone out. It was on my site, and it hadn't gone out to Twitter yet. And I was like, oh crap, what did I do? What did I break? Like, I'm sure this is my fault, and my website's broken. Now I have to go fix it. And I went into the logs, digging up the logs, and I see it. There was this API error that I got back from the API when it tried to post it, and it was like something. It was like this operation has been disabled or something. I think I took a screenshot. Anyway, I was like, oh, it was suspicious. That's what they said. It was like this looks suspicious. Yeah, this request looks like it might be automated. To protect our users from spam and other malicious activity, we can't complete this action right now. And I was like, oh, okay, at least my code's not broken, but that means my API keys might be broken. And Twitter may not like me only tweeting from my website, because I basically look like a bot on Twitter, right? Because I'm only ever posting tweets from this app. And I was like, great, now I'm going to have to go like figure out if I have to go reapply for something or get unblocked by the Twitter developer console. So I was like, well, I'm in the middle of this conversation. Let me just go to the website, the Twitter website, and copy my reply over there. And I got the same error from the Twitter website. It said the same thing. And I was like, okay, this is not my fault. I know this is not my fault anymore. And then all of my IRC and Discord channels started blowing up, people talking about Twitter getting hacked. And I was like, what's going on? What is going on? That's when I started digging into it. And I was like, this is actually a huge deal. This is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I basically have looked at kind of three sources. There's the Twitter support, there's the article on The Verge, and there's the article on Motherboard. And what we actually know is pretty small. There's a lot of speculation, but we know some things at least. Maybe we could talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start with the source, right? Twitter support has actually been tweeting about this. So it's nice that they're actually providing us some amount of information so we don't have to speculate too bad. But let me share this. This is the whole thread from Twitter right now, starting with, we're aware of a security incident. And then, oh yeah, so the reason that I was getting that API error was because they had essentially turned off tweeting for all verified accounts. So everybody with a verified account just couldn't tweet anymore. And the memes that came out of that were hilarious
Spectacular.
and so good. But yeah, so we're continuing to limit the ability to tweet, reset your password, and, right? So they eventually, like 2 hours later, rolled that back. But this is where they start actually giving us information. We detected what we believe to be a coordinated social engineering attack by people who successfully targeted some of our employees with access to internal systems and tools. So this actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's very unlikely that a technical hack of like cracking passwords, cracking two-factor auth, or that kind of, or even cracking, like stealing access tokens, it's unlikely that those would be able to be used to simultaneously then tweet from this many different high-profile accounts, right? That's just too much. It's hard enough to just like straight up crack two-factor auth, right? That's like some very careful social engineering. But in order to do that and then do it at the same time with that many people is very unlikely. So the internal tool makes a lot more sense of if you can get a Twitter employee who has access to some sort of internal tool that can do something, that's now only one place you have to attack. And then you can get access to a bunch of stuff. So the question then is, what is this internal tool and what powers does it have? Right. So this was a very common feature in like e-commerce sites especially, or but many platforms have this feature of support staff being able to essentially impersonate users within the system. And most of the time, this is helpful, right? Where you want a customer service person who's fielding a phone call to be able to help the person out by, just sort of making it work for them. And there's a common pattern of impersonating users where you can just like click a thing in the drop-down, say, I'm going to become this user, and then you can act as though you are logged in as them.
It's usually so you can see what they're seeing, and it's a much better way to troubleshoot with somebody if you can actually experience what they're experiencing, but has some downsides.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's not a read-only impersonation, then all of a sudden you now no longer really have well, I guess you could build it in a way where you do have an audit trail that this has happened, but you now have the ability for any of these support staff to do whatever someone can do in the system, whether that's place an order or send an email or, in this case, post a tweet. So that's one theory about what the internal tool is. But there are also screenshots that have been leaked, and I don't think they've been necessarily verified yet, of what this internal tool actually is. And it is not that, but it is essentially tools that Twitter staff can use to block or hide or mark accounts as compromised.
Do you want to show that on your screen?
Yeah. This is
It's not up.
This is one that I found. Oops, that wasn't what I meant to click. This is what I meant to click.
There we go. Yeah.
This one. So this is 100% not verified at all. So hopefully this is real, but you can see these kinds of tools where like Twitter staff could mark this account with these various buttons. And I think somewhere in here there was a I don't have the screenshot of the other one that includes the ability to like essentially reset their email address, change their email address, right? So if someone's trying to recover an account and they are like trying to email support and being like, hey, I lost my email address, I need you to change it. It's usually a nice thing for customer service to be able to fix that problem and override the email on their account. But in this case, if they override the email to the hacker's email, then the hacker then just does a password reset, removes two-factor auth, and can get in, and then they're just logged in as that user. And that would be extremely difficult for the real user to then recover from, because email is the traditional recovery method. Oh, nice. Micah found the link from the Vice or Motherboard article. So this is another photo of a screen, a screenshot of the supposed internal tool. I don't see a button on there that says reset though. So
Yeah.
But it makes complete sense that there are tools like this at Twitter, and many companies have these kinds of tools. And I think the takeaway here is be very, very careful of what privileges you give to your support staff, right? Like it might seem like a good idea to be able to override emails or help people recover their accounts, but without enough like checks and confirmations and oversight, it's very, very easy to completely misuse. Yeah. So Satish says, do you think this is politically motivated, related to upcoming elections? I actually don't, because if it were, what they did with these accounts would have been very different, right? Like they just posted this tweet that was like, send Bitcoin here, which is, and then like once they do this and, everyone knows that this, hack has happened and Twitter is on red alert mode, it's going to be very hard to do that again. So it's not even the kind of thing where like a lot of times hackers will sort of like do a test run of a particular hack to try to see if it'll work before they do the sort of real hack. But I don't think they could get away with that here, because once they test this out by doing this fake Bitcoin scam, they're essentially burning that bridge, right? Like there's someone at Twitter who either did it themselves or was compromised, social engineered into doing it, or was like just implicit in it and handed off the tool to the attacker, right? So if it's an internal tool, someone at Twitter was involved in some way, whether that's social engineering or malicious, and that particular person is never going to do that again, right? Unless they are malicious, in which case they were probably going to be fired immediately.
The other thing that strikes me along in the same vein as a waste of a hack, we may never know the details, but it's not just Twitter investigating this internally. With a former president and VP being part of this, there has to be other agencies and Secret Service or what have you involved in getting to the bottom of what happened and going after the people responsible. It's like a whole different level of response, I'm imagining, that's going to be employed from this than say even a verified user, but an ordinary verified user getting hacked. There's a whole bunch of different agencies involved that maybe wouldn't have been otherwise. And given that would you'd know that would be a likely outcome, it seems even like a further waste of a hack.
Yeah, exactly.
But good for everybody else, I guess, that it only got as far as it did. And this exact same sort of attack, I'm sure, will not be able to happen again.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm sure Twitter is putting policies in place now to make sure that this can't happen again with their internal tools, right? Like maybe it takes 2 employees to reset someone's email. That way, at least 2 people have to be socially engineered into doing it, or
right.
Which is less likely to happen than just one person.
It's a tough thing to strike that balance. Just as an aside, we get requests from customers all the time, like multiple times a week, I want to say, at Okta for, how can we implement a masquerade or impersonation functionality for our customer support
Yep.
department. And our answer is always like, we just don't support that natively, and we don't recommend that you architect something to, build something yourself to support that. And it's a tough call because it has the utility that you described, but the surface area for doing no good is too great a chance to take.
Yeah, it's a tough line to draw there because yeah, there are legitimate uses of impersonation, but there's also a lot of opportunity to do for things to go wrong. And like, do you really want to create that situation for yourself where you might be, uh, you know, exposing your users to this problem? But I was noticing there was also a lot of comments about blaming when this was first unfolding, before it was clear that it was like 20 very high profile, significant people. Um, there were a lot of people who were saying like, oh, make sure you have two-factor auth on your account, right? Like, of course, do that so that your account's secure, and get a better password, right? Like, thinking that these accounts were just a sort of simple hack of you know breaking into cracking a password using a password dump from some other place to just try logging in. But it became very clear that wasn't the case, and I really liked this tweet from Blaine, who coincidentally is actually one of the creators of OAuth. But I thought he said this really well, which is, if people are telling you to change your password because of this, then you're essentially being gaslighted, because that had nothing to do with the problem, right? This was not a problem of users not securing their own accounts. It was not their fault, right? You could have done everything right in this scenario of have a good password, have two-factor auth, even have like a unique email that isn't reused in other places so that email resets are less likely to work. You could have done all that right, and this still would have been a problem because it was Twitter's internal tool that caused it.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting, like we don't have any specific details, but you would imagine that at least some of these verified accounts, they had to have 2FA enabled. So whatever happened, there was some way to
Yeah.
reset that, bypass it, whatever. Because usually that's understandably that's it's still great advice, and it's a common fallback, and I've certainly been saved by having two-factor myself. But if there's some internal way to bypass that, it's kind of game over, regardless of the strength of your password or the strength of your factor. If somebody, if there's an interface that allows you to reset an email or change an email, it may well have the ability to reset or disable 2FA, and then, not much you can do about that. And there must have been some mechanism like that, even though we don't know the details, because some of those accounts had to have had 2FA enabled.
Yeah. And I think that's a really tricky one too, because again, you can make the case that the support staff need a way to disable two-factor auth, because if someone has a YubiKey enrolled as their second factor and then they lose it or it gets smashed, then they're completely locked out of their account, right? What are you going to do? Like, you have to have a way to remove it in order for them to get back into their account, unless you have backup two-factor auth methods, which you should do. But some services don't support more than one method, which is bad, its own problem. But again, even if you tell people like do all these things, there will be people who have only one copy of the key and only that one method enrolled. And if you want a way to help them, there needs to be a way for an administrator to go in and unenroll it so that they can log back in. And as soon as that tool is there, it can then be abused. So that's the kind of thing where, like, if you're going to provide a way for your customer service staff to unenroll people's emails or second factors or change their passwords, you have to do something to make sure that can't be abused, right? which is a hard problem because a lot of companies will always have to build that feature because otherwise they know they're going to get people will just get locked out of their accounts. This is actually one thing I like about 1Password. I use 1Password for my password manager. And before I started using it, I did a lot of research into it because I generally didn't trust I don't trust cloud services to be like, actually secure because it's just a database somewhere at the end of the day. Um, and I did a lot of research into it, and I was actually very impressed to learn about how they handle it. And they do essentially everything right, where you have your own passphrase, they have another key, and the two together unlock the encrypted storage. So what it means is that they never actually store my passphrase. It's something that's only done client side to unlock the encryption, which means if I ever lose that, they can't actually unlock my account because they don't have the ability to because they never built it in.
There's a
And
lot of
as
disclaimers about that being a user also, like all over the place, because it's just no amount of support will
yeah,
get that unlocked if you lose your passphrase.
and as scary as that is, it made me feel a lot better as someone who actually, well, I do believe I can, remember it and make a backup of it in a secure place or whatever. Um, and I like the reassurance that I know that they don't have an override switch. So
Yeah, same.
that is why, yeah, that's why I use them. But that's like completely not the case with Google, right? Google is also a password manager, I guess. You can save passwords in Chrome and they get synced up to your Google account, which is cool that they sync to your other devices, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just using your Google account. And I do believe that the Google account team does do many things right and does actually believe that they are trying to protect the Google customers. But they, at any point, can delete my account for no reason without any warning because I'm not paying them. And they could just unenroll all my second factors if they wanted to, right? I don't know what internal tools they have, but like it's technically possible that they can just remove my factors. And nothing about a second factor is actually a like security or encryption mechanism itself. It's just flipping bits in an internal database in a way that can be proven, right? So
Yeah.
I don't trust Google to store passwords because I know that they could get them if they wanted to. Like someone can get access if they are able to socially engineer a Google employee or something to whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. It's slightly off topic, but you reminded me, one of the features I also like about 1Password is that they implemented kind of in reaction to the controversy over like who's allowed access to your phone and who's allowed to force you to unlock your phone. And they made this feature where you can set up this travel mode where it
Mm.
temporarily removes local vaults that you specify from your device. And then when you get where you're going, you can turn that back off and it'll resync. But those passwords, those accounts are no longer on your device at all. Even if somebody were to force you to unlock your device,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be there.
Yeah,
Pretty
that's a
cool.
pretty cool feature too.
Not that we've done a lot of traveling lately.
Yeah. Someday we'll be back.
Yep. What else do we know? What somebody pointed out to me there was some so what Motherboard confirmed, they actually were able to speak to some hackers and guaranteed their anonymity, and they were able to confirm that these hackers were in control of certain accounts. So they verified that. And one of those hackers claimed that they paid a Twitter employee to get access to this internal tool. But somebody pointed out to me that that aspect of it has not been verified at all. We just don't know yet.
Mm.
What we do know is that some hackers proved they were in control of accounts that they shouldn't have had access to. but we still don't know exactly how they got that control.
Yep. Yeah, there's a couple of ways it could have gone down. Paying people, bribing them, right? Classic technique. Or social engineering, tricking them into it unknowingly. Or yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if they ever do actually confirm that, because I think that could also tell us a lot about how some of those internal systems or processes work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any other questions on the Twitter stuff? We're halfway. We're at the halfway mark, half hour mark, so we could switch into OAuth and OpenID Connect stuff as well. I had a fun workshop that I did yesterday. By the way, I'm doing the third part. This last month I've been doing these workshops in 3 parts. So instead of a long session, we're doing 3 90-minute sessions: intro to OAuth clients, and then API access management, and talking about access tokens and token validation and stuff like that. The last part's tomorrow, and you're welcome to join. You can always find these at octadev.events, but I'll just drop a link in the chat to this. Anyway, what I did yesterday was I made a little mock conversation, text message conversation between players in the OAuth flow to simulate how the exchange works. So instead of like the sequence diagrams, which I have a really hard time with those sequence diagrams of like all the arrows pointing back and forth, because I feel like they get really confusing really quick unless you have somebody like walk you through them step by step. And even then, they're still pretty hard to actually get your head around until you look at them long enough. So I like the text message thread idea. I'm trying to find my screenshots of them because I could share them. They're pretty fun. But we do when we were doing these in person, doing these theater exercises of making people go through a conversation themselves to simulate the OAuth flow, which again was a lot of fun, but we're not doing these in person anymore, and it turns out doing that over Slack or Zoom is really hard. So I'm hoping that this is here we go. Let's see if I can do this right. If I share this screen, I think Keynote will go into the right spot. Share screen 3. You should just see an OAuth logo. Cool. Yep. And now, okay, I can't see anything, so I hope this is right.
Yeah, we had the OAuth logo, now we have Yelp and the kitty cat.
Perfect. I hate how Keynote takes over the entire all the monitors.
Don't get me started.
Like, I have 3 monitors here, and Keynote's like, oh, pay attention to me, and I can't do anything else now. Anyway, yeah, so the cat is the user trying to log into Yelp. Cat says, hey, Yelp. And Yelp says, what's up? And the cat says, can I log in? I want to see what SEP is all about. And Yelp says, sure, I want to log in with your Google account. And the cat says, yeah, works for me. And then this is where the OAuth flow starts. Yelp says, all right, go talk to Google. Tell them my client ID is blah, blah, blah. And tell them my code challenge is this other number. All right, back soon. Now the cat goes over to Google and starts talking to Google. New conversation thread. And I think this does a nice job of really clearing up who's talking to who here, right? Yelp is out of the picture. So now the cat's talking to Google saying, hey, I'm trying to log into Yelp. This is their client ID. This is the code challenge. Google asks the cat to verify Google password. Of course, you would never actually type passwords in a text message thread, so I might need to figure out a better... I think it's fine. You get the idea. But then Google asks, great, just to confirm, you're trying to log into Yelp, and this is the consent screen that pops up of like, are you sure you want to log into this app? Are you sure you want to share your email address? And the cat says, yep, thanks. All right, give this code to Yelp. They'll be able to look this up, look up your info using this code. So then the cat sends that code over to Yelp, and Yelp goes to Google and says, hey, it's Yelp. Someone's trying to log in. Can I get their details? The code I got from the user is this, and the code verifier I used is this, which is the Parecki mechanism, which is this is not a realistic explanation. This is not a realistic simulation of actually Parecki, but it gets the point across, I think. And then Google does the whole verification process of, all right, I just issued that code. Let me double check that code verifier, calculates to the right hash, and returns the user's info. So anyway, I think that's fun. I'm going to try to do more of those, more of the simulated text message conversations, because I think they're fun.
Sidebar,
but let me know
I totally
what
want
you
to make
think.
a bot out of this on like using Twilio or something.
Right? Yeah, I really want this to be a bot that you can actually talk to, so that you can actually go and participate in this conversation. So have to figure out a way to not make it so that you have to type exact words, right? But still score you somehow to make sure that it progresses or fails properly. So it'd be a fun exercise.
It could be fun, I would imagine, too, simulating some other, maybe deprecated flows, like you attempt to do the implicit flow and somebody like tunes into your conversation like, hey, thanks for this access token I just stole or something. Could have fun with it.
I did do one with the password flow, which kind of points out the problem with the password flow, right? Which is that cat has to then give their password to Yelp, and Yelp has to give it to Google, which is like when you look at it played out that way, it's very clear that there's a problem there.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. But yeah, join tomorrow, and we're doing the third part, all about access tokens and validating access tokens and token lifetime considerations and things like that.
I have a question about OpenID Connect Discovery, which you may be interested in. And that is, I've just been doing some research for an upcoming security conference. And I've just been finding various companies that have implemented OpenID Connect and then looking at their discovery document, which is optional. You don't have to implement discovery, but a lot of people do. And one thing that I find interesting is that it leaks a lot of information about your service. And it's intended to do that, but I just wonder kind of the rationale and how that fits into security concepts of not leaking information, because now all of a sudden, in a very public way, I know all of the features that your service supports, and maybe you don't want me to know that necessarily. Or maybe it's just that, if you are going to support discovery, you're going to have to make sure that you're properly protected because you are enabling access to a lot of public information. So I was just curious about your take on all that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The discovery document is there to provide enough information to have clients automatically configure themselves, right? So the client needs to know some amount of information in order to do an OAuth flow, like where is the authorization endpoint, where's the token endpoint, um, where's the keys to verify ID tokens. But then there's also a lot of stuff in there that I would say is less required in all cases. So like scopes, for example, there's a list in there of like what scopes are supported. And well, I know in Okta you can choose whether or not scopes appear in that metadata list. But that one's weird because I feel like most of the time the scopes don't need to be dynamically discovered because they're very dependent on application, what your application is doing and how it works and how your API works, such that any sort of automatic discovery, I guess I don't quite see the use for it, right? And I feel like it's just going to be leaking information about what scopes are supported so that someone could come along and, well, try out what happens when they request other scopes. And if you're misusing scopes for building out a permissions model, then that's really, a problem because then someone can just straight up maybe get an admin access token. Yeah, so I feel like there's some of that information is relatively harmless because like the location of the authorization endpoint is going to be found out as soon as the user logs in. So that's not really leaking. Also, it's the authorization endpoint, which is the thing protecting the entire system, so that should be secure anyway. But yeah, I would question whether all of the things in that discovery document are actually needed for like a even simple OpenID Connect flow. And it is a valid concern of like, what are you putting out there, right?
Yeah, and you hit. I kind of discovered two things. You hit on one of them. One was that I found a website that uses OpenID Connect, and I saw the scopes that it requested for my login. And then I thought, well, it might be. I wonder if I could request additional scopes. And then I thought, well, how am I supposed to know what the scopes are? But then when I found their discovery document, I had a list of all the scopes. And maybe it's not complete, like you were saying with Okta, you can pick and choose which scopes show up in that list. This was a different provider, so I don't know how they manage that. But all of a sudden, I had an answer to, at least a partial answer to a question I had asked, which is, well, how am I supposed to know what these other scopes are? Now I had at least a
Mm-hmm.
partial answer to that. And then the other thing was I was kind of on a mission to discover, which sites out there that are used by consumers are still supporting the implicit flow. And I could just try, but I can also get the discovery document, which tells me right away if it supports response types and grant types and things like that. Made it a little easier.
Yep. Yeah, the let me take a look at one in on the screen share because I have where'd my window go? There it is. We can just take a look at one of my Okta servers discovery document. And so like this is clearly useful. That's the first URL the app's going to use to send the user to. This is where the tokens come from. That's cool. Registration endpoint. I guess that's for dynamic client registration, which you're not always going to use, right? Like sometimes that feature is going to be disabled. So it seems like maybe it should not be there if it's disabled. But then this is what you're talking about, right? So if token is in the list of response type supported, it means that server supports the implicit flow. Now, in this case, in Okta, the flows are enabled specifically to each application. So even though the server supports the implicit flow, there are no apps on my account that actually are configured to allow the implicit flow. So it's kind of misleading in that case. So maybe it actually shouldn't be there if I'm making a list of feature requests for our discovery document right now, right? Because like technically there's no apps on my account that support the implicit flow, so it shouldn't actually be in that list. But then another one that caught my eye was this list of signing algorithms used, right?
Hmm.
That could be, I could see how that could be information that you may not want to share with someone, right?
Right.
Same with the authorization methods of how, oh, actually, here's a good one. Introspection endpoint authorization methods supported, right? So introspection is um, if an API is going to introspect an access token, try to figure out what's inside of it without doing the JSON Web Token validation and parsing, you can send the access token to the introspection endpoint, and it will tell you stuff about it. However, sometimes the request to that needs authentication, right? And that's going to be dependent on the OAuth server. I've noticed that if an access token is issued to a client that has a client secret, then I have to use client secret to use the introspection endpoint. But if a public client gets an access token, I can use the public client's client ID only with no authentication to introspect the token, which means that there are some cases where no authentication is needed to use introspection. So the fact that this is in there means that someone could be like, oh, I can now try to see what happens if I introspect tokens without worrying about trying to also find a client secret from something. So that's another place someone can go and start poking around and trying to see what's going on, right? So, yeah.
Lots of information in there. Maybe not all needed, or maybe not all should be on by default.
Yep. Micah, do you want to explain what you just sent to me in chat?
Yeah, it's very Okta specific, but with Okta's authorization servers, you specify a policy that that indicates what grants, what flows you want to support, and that's what ultimately comes back in the discovery document. And then you bind your authorization server to one or more clients. It could be all your clients that you've defined in Okta. It could be one single one or a handful of them. And so then to actually make a decision on whether it's going to issue a token, it's like the intersection of what you've defined in the policy and what the application itself allows. So you could have implicit flow turned on in your authorization server policy, but if it's bound to a client that doesn't support the implicit flow, a token won't be granted if somebody tries to use the implicit flow. So it's like that intersection, and that can be a little bit confusing, and it can kind of give you false information from the discovery document unintentionally. So if you have a broader set of flows that you've decided to support in your authorization server, but the client that it's bound to doesn't support those, then your discovery document is kind of lying in a way.
Interesting. I actually didn't realize that was a separate whole setting. So I learned something today. I'll have to go try to find that. But yeah, I think the last thing you said there is the important part of, like, a discovery document might actually be lying because of various policies configured on the server in various ways, and every OAuth server is going to be doing this differently. So at that point, like, what's the actual value of it, right? And maybe you should just provide that bare minimum that you do need. Like, the authorization endpoint and the token endpoint are very good things to be able to discover programmatically, right? So that you can configure a client with just the issuer URL. But yeah. There's a question from chat here we can address. Once we get an access token, if we distribute that to many trusted clients who weren't part of the original OAuth flow, what are the possible security issues here? And so I guess I would say that's definitely creating a risky situation, because this is the OAuth security is based around the idea that clients are going to protect their access tokens, right? Like, the whole if an application gets an access token, it's expected to keep it secret and only use it at the API. So if the app then distributes the tokens, you essentially lose the assurance that, like, if you're doing that intentionally, you then lose the assurance that an access token was actually legitimate at all, right? Because now you break the audit trail. So if you're trying to have, like, I'm not trying to even like figure out like what's a realistic use case for this.
I mean, typically you would expect that the client may be sending that access token to lots of different resource servers potentially. But is it a
Yeah.
common use case to take that access token and send it to other clients for them to use? I wouldn't think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, like I could see, so if you imagine like a shopping cart website, or actually let's break it up into more parts, right? There's the like catalog website that lists all the products, and then you're building the checkout system as a separate website, right? Because it's just doing the payment processing and address collection. And then totally separately from that is the loyalty system, right? The reward system. So you've got essentially 3 different apps, and they're going to share the same OAuth server because the accounts are the same. I could see how it would be tempting to do something like have one app do the login, and then when the user is ready to bounce to the checkout, you somehow have them take their access token with them to the checkout app and provide it to the checkout app, right? And I can see why that would be tempting. The problem with that is, well, there's actually several problems with it, and this is, yeah, maybe this is the answer here. When this is the same problem as the authorization code injection attack or access token injection attack, where if a user is bringing an access token into an application, the application can't actually trust that access token, right? Because the application can only actually trust an access token if it gets it from the OAuth server, which is the entire reason for doing Pixie and the authorization code flow, is so that access tokens come directly from the OAuth server in a way that the app can actually verify it came from there. So if you are trying to let one app accept an access token from another app or from the user, you've broken that chain, that link, and now the app can no longer actually trust that, one, it's the same user, 2, it can't actually tell if it's even like remotely connected to the same system. It's just because access tokens are not, as far as apps are concerned, access tokens are opaque, so they can't actually verify them until they go and use them to do the operation, right? So you could end up in a situation just like the authorization code injection attack that, Micah, you have a video on this channel, where if you were able to do that access token handoff, you could have somebody end up placing the order on somebody else's account for a cart that was on the other account if you're able to swap access tokens like that. So yeah, sorry if that was a little bit confusing, but the summary there, or the correct thing to do is applications should only ever use access tokens that come directly from the OAuth server from the token endpoint.
And with the scenario that you described with Okta, and I'm sure other providers too, you could have 3 different OAuth clients defined in Okta, and you could leverage the SSO feature that Okta has built in, where when you went from the catalog to the cart, the application could go and fetch a new access token from Okta bound to that other client, leveraging your authenticated state. And then the token would be coming from the authorization server. You wouldn't be, one app wouldn't be sending it to another. So you could have confidence in it. And you'd also be in a better overall security footing because, maybe there's 5 different applications and you only really legitimately have access to 3 of them. So if you did try to hop over to some other application, when it went to try and fetch an access token, it would fail for that particular application because you don't have the right level of access for it.
Yep. Oh, and that gave me another idea, which is that the OAuth server may have different token lifetimes for each of those applications, because something like browsing a catalog, you probably want the longest possible access tokens and refresh tokens so that users don't log in all the time, right? But to actually check out and place an order, you probably want a much shorter access token because that's a riskier operation, right? And then, so that means it would actually be pretty bad in both directions of either using a long-lived access token to use the checkout system or taking an access token that's short-lived from the checkout system and dropping it into the cart or the catalog where you actually want the longer token. So using OAuth properly and segmenting into these different OAuth clients means you can then have different access token lifetime policies for each of these different applications.
Makes sense. Good question.
Yeah. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only a few minutes left, but if there aren't any other questions, I'm feeling like we should just end it there. I feel like that was a pretty good way to end on a strong question there.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and hope you learned something today. Let us know in the comments if you have any other questions or thoughts. We'll see how the whole Twitter situation unfolds over the next few days or weeks. I'm sure that'll be very interesting to follow. So,
Well, maybe in parting, we should just let people know the new schedule we're establishing, which we'll post
oh
online
yeah,
too.
yeah, we're for finding future events. Of course, subscribe to the channel here. That'll make it so that you get the pop-up when we go live, or hit the bell so you get the pop-up. Also, oktadev.events. We post all of our upcoming live streams and workshops there as well. We are going to be switching to every other week for a while now, and but again, just make sure you check either oktadev.events. You can even add that to your calendar. You can subscribe to that calendar like old school style. Put it in your iCal feeds. Or add to Google Calendar, whatever. Yeah, so we'll be doing this every other week, and hope to see you next time. All right.
All right.
Thanks.